Hey Savvy Social Workers, I am back, and today we are going to get into a few practice questions from the Unit 2 section of the Aswb exam. So let's get into it. A school social worker is meeting with a 10-year-old client who has been demonstrating hostile and uncooperative behaviors on a regular basis, as reported by his teacher. He will argue, talk back, and disobey anyone seen as an authority figure. The teacher has met with his parents several times. His parents complain about the constant arguing and his ability to annoy other people. The client is most likely demonstrating. Okay, so one of the things I teach with Unit 2 questions is first you have to be able to identify them and distinguish them from Unit 3 questions. And the way that you do that is you look for those questions that are primarily giving you a whole bunch of signs and symptoms, and you're going to know that this is a Unit 2 question, which they're normally asking you to either assess and or diagnose something that's going on in the scenario. This is how we point out Unit 2 questions. So because we are either assessing or diagnosing, we want to look for all of the signs and symptoms, okay? So we still do this using, the other methods that I teach as well, prioritizing the presenting and the priority problem, but you are paying specific attention to the signs and symptoms that are mentioned. So in this case, we have a social worker who is meeting. We know that this is the beginning phase of the helping process with a 10-year-old boy who is demonstrating hostile and all of this. And this was reported by his teacher. So this is going to be our presenting problem. I'll go ahead and highlight it all the way through. This is going to be our presenting problem or our initial situation. Okay, so same difference. So it also gives you some more information. He will argue, talk back. So all of this is signs of something. They're giving you signs of something, okay? So the teacher, it tells you the teacher has met with his parents several times. His parents complain about constant arguing and his ability to annoy people, okay? So I'm looking at this. This is a 10-year-old who has been demonstrating hostile and uncooperative behaviors on a regular basis. He argues, talks back, disobeys authority figures, constantly argues, and annoys people. So the question is asking, what is this client most likely demonstrating? So what makes the most sense for these signs and symptoms that are given up here? Is it ADHD or attention deficit disorder? Okay. Although some of these signs may be conducive to attention deficit disorder, a lot of these are not. Like, for instance, the constant arguing, that will probably not be a direct sign of someone with ADHD. Now, the ability to annoy other people and those things, maybe so. But demonstrating hostile and uncooperative behaviors are not defining characteristics of ADHD or ADD. So we're going to eliminate that one. Autism disorder, which this, and I'm going to go ahead on and just add autism spectrum disorder here. So looking at this, demonstrating hostile and uncooperative behaviors, which this is also not a defining characteristic of autism spectrum disorder. So we're going to eliminate that, because one thing that you have to know when answering these Unit 2 questions, all of the signs and symptoms have to match up with whatever diagnosis we're picking, okay? Or if we're assessing for something, we have to make sure we can't just pick one or two of the signs or symptoms and, try to diagnose it. All of them have to match up. I tell people 1 + 1 have to equal 2. You can't just, pick out certain things and then diagnose it. It all has to work together for one main diagnosis. Okay, so oppositional defiant disorder. So knowing what that is, we know that that's usually when people are having bad moves, temper tantrums, and things of that nature, which it kind of seems like this could be possibly some of the behaviors of ODD. So we're going to hold on to that. And then conduct disorder. Okay, from what I know about conduct disorder is usually in the older population, and it's usually when you have someone that is breaking the law a lot, and it is more behavioral than it is temperamental. So oppositional defiant disorder is usually more temperamental, and conduct disorder is usually more behavioral. So looking at the signs and symptoms, again, it says he does demonstrate hostile and uncooperative behaviors. He will argue, talk back, disobey anyone as seen as an authority figure. He's constantly arguing and annoying people. So a lot of these are leaning more towards the temperamental side. It is not really telling us that he's out here breaking the law, robbing people, stealing things, all of those things that I know are associated with conduct disorder. So I'm going to eliminate that. Because the client is displaying oppositional defiant disorder. His behaviors have become a serious issue that's being seen at home and at school. So remember, it's in two different places. It's not just at one. So his actions also affect his social life, his family life, his school life, which is his academics. So we want to look at that. So other symptoms or signs of oppositional defiant disorder include resentment, questioning of rules, and having a spiteful attitude. That's just long yap information, but this is more on the temperamental side. Now granted, there are some behavior issues here, but it's not as extreme to be labeled as conduct disorder, and given the fact that he's only 10 years old. Conduct disorder, oppositional defiant disorder normally kind of grows into conduct disorder, I guess, if there isn't, if we don't get a hold of it. But conduct disorder is usually for the older population, diagnosed much older, like from late adolescence on into adulthood. And so that's when they're breaking the law, they're robbing people, breaking into homes and cars and things of that carry legal consequences. Those are the things that we usually like to refer to as conduct disorder. So again, for this one, looking at these behaviors, hostile and uncooperative, he's been defiant. Okay, arguing and talking back and disobeying authority figures, he's been defiant. Again, constantly arguing at home and annoying people, he's being defiant. So oppositional defiant disorder is going to be our answer here. Next question. A social worker receives a referral from a physician for a client who he has concerns about the fluctuation of her weight. The client has struggled with diets her whole life, but is still 120 pounds over the average weight for her size. During the initial assessment, the client appeared to experience shame and distress when attempting to explain her eating habits. The client states that she, oftentimes, will consume more food than she needs, even when she isn't hungry. Which diagnosis is the client most likely exhibiting? Again, this is Unit 2 question. This time they're asking you specifically, again, about a diagnosis. So let's look at what we have. We receive a referral, so that means we're in the beginning phase of the helping process. And it comes from a physician, so we know that this client is under some type of physical or medical care already. So this doctor is having concerns about the fluctuation of her weight. So this referral is from a doctor who is concerned about his patient's weight fluctuation. That's going to be our presenting problem or the initial situation of why the client is there, what's going on, okay? Now, this other information is just telling you, giving you a little line up information of the situation. Now, during the initial session, which this assessment, which tells us where we are with the client, again, still in the beginning, the client appeared to experience shame and distress when attempting to explain her eating habits. The client states that she oftentimes will consume more food than she needs, even when she isn't hungry. Okay, so this is going to be what she says is going to be a big part of the priority problem. If you wanted to include the fact that she appeared to experience shame and distress, that's also important to note. But the nitty-gritty is what she expresses, and so that is that she will consume more food than she often needs, even when she isn't hungry. So looking at these signs and symptoms, again, we're looking at specific signs and symptoms. Which one is going to be what she's most likely exhibiting? Okay, so which one makes the most sense? So let's see all the signs and symptoms in here. So she's had a fluctuation of weight. That's a sign of something. She struggled with diets her whole life. She's 120 pounds over the average weight for her size. So she's shamed when she talks about her eating habits, and she consumes more food than she needs. Is this a sign of bulimia? So knowing that bulimia is when a person has an intense fear of gaining weight, we can eliminate this as well, because one of the hallmark symptoms of bulimia is this person has an intense fear of gaining weight, so they will normally purge after they eat and do all of that. And it's not saying any of that in here, so we're going to eliminate that. Depression. So we're talking about her eating habits. All this is about her weight. She was referred because of her weight, and so we're talking about things that are involving her weight and the food that she's eating, so we are going to eliminate that. Binge eating. So now knowing what binge eating disorder is, that's when we overeat a lot, and it's outside of our control. So this does sound like this could be the issue. She's struggling with diet. She's eating more than what she needs, even when she isn't hungry. So that tells me that that is a control issue as well. So we're going to keep that one. Anxiety. Again, this is specifically talking about her consuming more food when she's not even hungry. I'm not saying she don't have anxiety, but that is not going to be the most likely diagnosis here when we are trying to figure out an issue about her weight and the food she's eating. So because binge eating is characterized by episodes of overeating, that feels like it's beyond the client's control, that is going to be the most plausible answer. So like some of the other eating disorders, they will fast, or like bulimia, you're fast or you're purge afterwards. And so that doesn't happen here with binge eating, which is why it leads to obesity, because you're not purging or you're not fasting or you're not restricting calories. Like people that struggle with anorexia, they normally restrict calorie intake so that they can't gain weight. So this isn't the case here. The person that struggles with binge eating is not throwing it up or anything like that. So this will normally lead to overeating, which could also lead to being overweight, which is what she's struggling with, being 120 pounds over the average weight for her size and struggling with diets her whole life because of her lack of control. A social worker is seeing a client who constantly exhibits attention-seeking behavior in a provocative way by the way she acts and dresses. Her emotions rapidly shift, and she is very dramatic for the smallest of things, which limits her ability to sustain stable friendships. The client most likely has a diagnosis of. Again, for diagnosis, we are zooming in on signs and symptoms. So let's look in here. So it says is seeing. So this means that this could be one of our regular clients. In this case, they're asking us for a diagnosis. So it really doesn't matter. Because it's one of those either you know it or you don't type questions when they're asking you for a specific diagnosis. So it doesn't really matter where we are in the process with them. So let's look at the signs and symptoms. So she constantly exhibits attention-seeking behaviors in a provocative way by the way she acts and the way she dresses. Her emotions rapidly shift. So we have some provocative behaviors, rapidly shifting emotions, and she's very dramatic for the smallest of things, and so she's unable to sustain stable friendships. Does that, which one of these diagnoses does that sound like? Does it sound like histrionic personality disorder? I do know that people that are diagnosed with histrionic personality disorder, they usually have extreme attention-seeking behaviors and are very dramatic. So we'll pause that. Narcissistic personality disorder, that is more along the lines of a person just wanting to be in control of everything, in control of everyone, and wants to be looked up to like a god or whatever. And that is not what's going on in here. So we're going to eliminate that. Schizoid personality disorder is the one that I normally associate with kind of like social anxiety disorder. They really don't care to have many social relationships with people. So that is not what's going on here. We can eliminate that. And then of course, dependent personality is when you are just kind of like extremely needy on certain people, whether it be a partner, a spouse, a parent, or something like that, which is not what's happening here either. So People with histrionic personality disorder have difficulty achieving and maintaining intimacy in their romantic relationships as well as their friendships. They often act out a role, and they do try to control people, being very dramatic, and also being very provocative to try to get what they want, which can also be threatening to other people. They crave stimulation and excitement, so this is another reason why they will be dressing a certain way to get attention, acting a certain way to get attention, because they crave that stimulation. So these are all characteristics of histrionic personality disorder: rapidly shifting emotions, because they're very, very dramatic. So yes, this one will be a histrionic personality disorders. I would advise that you do study all the clusters of the personality disorders. I do have a video coming soon about them, but until that video comes, I would advise that you kind of study them in clusters and know the different signs and symptoms of each type of personality disorder for the exam. A 5-year-old child has been recently diagnosed with ADHD after demonstrating shortfalls in at least 2 important areas. Deficits can be observed at home, in the classroom, and in group activities. Which of the following would not be a symptom of ADHD? So I'm going to make sure we go heavy on the nots, okay? So that means for people like me, myself, when we have these not questions or these except questions, all I do is take the word completely out, and then I kind of flip it, and so that helps me to get to the answer better, because for some reason I cannot think backwards in this way. So instead of saying would not, I am going to say which of the following are symptoms of ADHD. Difficulty focusing, yes. So that means I'm going to scratch it out, because I know ultimately I'm looking for the one that's not, but to help me better process, I am going to just take that not out. So memory loss, is that a symptom of ADHD? It definitely is. So we're going to scratch that out, because we're looking for the one that is not. Boredom, definitely a symptom of ADHD. Now, what about defiance? Defiant is not a listed symptom of ADHD. Now, granted, a child can be defiant that has ADHD, but that is not one of the defining symptoms that we use to diagnose ADHD. So children identified as suffering from ADHD do not intentionally display defiant behaviors. They become more of a distraction to others and fail to complete tasks due to their inability to focus, but they are not intentionally displaying defiant behaviors. So this is going to be the one that is not a symptom of ADHD. I hope y'all see how I did that, and I hope it helps people who struggle with the not questions or the except questions. A social worker is seeing a 21-year-old client who self-reports having hallucinations, paranoia, and disorganized speech. To avoid many of these problems, the client has learned to isolate himself from social situations. Additionally, the biopsychosocial history shows a prevalence of mental illness in his family. What diagnosis should the social worker mostly consider? All right, so again, we're looking for a specific diagnosis right here. So it's saying you're seeing a 20-year-old client. He self-reports hallucinations, paranoia, disorganized speech. Let's highlight those. The client has learned to isolate himself. He's isolating himself from social situations, and he has a prevalence of mental illness in his family. So let's look at these signs and symptoms as a whole. Hallucinations, paranoia, disorganized speech. Does that have anything to do with schizophrenia? It does, so we can pause it. Dissociative disorder. That does not, so we're going to eliminate that. Bipolar disorder. Some of these, yes, so we're going to keep that. Schizoaffective disorder also could be some of those signs and symptoms. So now let's go a little bit further. Isolating himself from social situations. That is not a sign of bipolar disorder, so we can leave that alone, because remember, it has to equal up to all of these. All right, and then there's a prevalence of mental illness in the family. So we can also make sure that we know the ones that are kind of genetic. Okay, so this is a 21-year-old client. We want to keep that in mind. So now we have to decide if it's either schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder. Which we know that schizophrenia has a typical onset of early adulthood. He's 21 years old. And it can be very disabling, which could also cause him to want to socially isolate. People with this disorder may hear voices that other people don't hear. They may believe like people are reading their minds, controlling their thoughts, or wanting to harm them. All of this can make them terrified, which is another reason why they would socially isolate. People with schizophrenia may not make sense when they talk. They may sit for hours without talking, so definitely these are all signs of directly schizophrenia. If you do not know what schizoaffective disorder is, it is a schizophrenia disorder that has more of effect on your mood, that affects the mood. And so they're not really talking about that in this situation. So that's why it is not schizophrenia disorder. Schizoaffective disorder. So again, I hope this was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. And again, let's continue to get those passes the Aswb way.